Hello, welcome to episode 23 of Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Mark Cate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
And in this episode, we are going to be talking about the movie Get Out from 2017, earlier this year. And to prepare you, next episode, we are going to be talking about Clive Barker's Nightbreed from 1990. Do you want to give sort of like I feel like some people might need some urging to go and seek that one out, because I don't think that's nearly as common as most of what we cover.
Yeah, Nightbreed is a movie that I really love and a lot of horror people really love. And it's a movie that Clive Barker did, and it has really great special effects and what could have been a really good, cool movie, although it seems to have gotten the studio treatment pretty bad, and it was all chopped up, and it wasn't until about a year or two ago that they released more of a director's cut version of it. But they didn't release it with real footage. They cut in this video footage, so it's really uneven and shitty looking, and the music isn't right, and it's super odd. But it has all these really neat ideas and monsters and this really expanded cool mythos, and I keep hoping that there'll be an HBO show about it.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
It really has such a big cosmology and a lot of really unique ideas that are ripe for exploitation for sure.
Yeah, and they walked them out. There's 2 or 3 different comic book series they've done over the years that kind of explain more the backstories of some of the characters, and some of the writing in those is not great. But the newer series that came out in 2015 is pretty phenomenal and definitely worth checking out if you're a fan of that movie.
But the original movie is really weird and really fun, so I recommend that movie to anybody.
Yeah.
But especially so you can follow along with next episode. When this episode started, there was some new theme music, just especially for this episode, and that is by my 7-year-old niece, Madison. Thanks for the tune, Maddie. What shall we tell people? Please hit scarythoughts.org, sign up for our newsletter, and keep up to date on episodes and memes and recommendations.
Yep. And go over to iTunes or Stitcher, wherever you listen to podcasts, and give us a rating. 5 stars always what we're looking for, and seems to be what we've been getting, so that's phenomenal.
Keep it coming.
Yep. So the more you do that, the happier we will be.
And you'll get better episodes out of us. Also, a warning, full spoiler alert for this and every Scary Thoughts episode. We are not reviewing Get Out. We are talking about Get Out as if you've seen it. And there might be slight spoilers for Stepford Wives and Rosemary's Baby in here too, which, for God's sake, see all of these movies.
Yeah. And maybe a little bit of spoiler for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. But
But I think, given the era, we all know how that ended.
And then you'll have to tolerate me probably talking about Lovecraft Country a little bit more. Go ahead and read it. We'll eventually do an episode about it. I can't shut up about it. So
that's great. We should totally cover that book.
Yep.
Okay. So how do we want to start talking about Get Out?
So Get Out is great. That's what everybody says about it, and it made me immediately go, this movie's probably going to fucking suck. And everybody's just fawning over it because it's so racially charged, and it's talking about our current moment. And so I really wasn't expecting it to be great on its own, but it is great on its own. It is a movie made by a real deal horror nerd that is obsessive and cool and funny, and this movie is obsessive and cool and funny.
Yeah, and I think that this conversation, there's sort of a split when talking about Get Out, because there is the movie and then there is the conversation about the movie, the greater themes that it takes on. Jordan Peele, the writer, producer, director himself, referred to this as a social thriller, which he thinks of as being in line with Rosemary's Baby and the Stepford Wives. And so he's kind of coining a term there and possibly, hopefully, starting a movement. What that idea reminded me of is a bit of Afrofuturism, which I think this is in line with too, because it's slightly sci-fi-ish. And it also sort of reminds me of the book Octavia's Brood, which is all these social justice writers writing science fiction in lineage with Octavia Butler. And then I think you brought up that there is sort of black weird fiction. Well, Lovecraft Country, but if you want to maybe touch on how that's connected.
Yeah, there's been a run of books that kind of have this sort of black weird fiction thing going on. There's Lovecraft Country by Matt Ruff and Ballad of Black Tom by Victor LaValle. And, this movie is Get Out is definitely in that genre. And it has this really cool feel to it because you have the usual terror of the cosmic entities from beyond, and it's made strange by what most of these authors do is they say, like, okay, unlike Victorian white people who would just bug the fuck out because they just freaked out over like a knee being exposed in a dress during the Victorian age, we have these really smart Jim Crow, post-Jim Crow black characters. And because their day-to-day life is so tough and strange because of white supremacy, they're going to do a little bit better with these cosmic horrors. And I buy it.
They're
like,
better prepared,
I get it. Like a character who is always looking over his shoulder because he drives from the north to the south frequently in like 1954 in a car that's probably a little nicer than he's supposed to have by the Southern standards of the time. Like, that character is going to be on edge all the time. Whereas your character who's like, oh, good day, sir. I have just summoned the Black Beast, in some corny steampunk novel. Like they're just going to have a different manner of dealing with this sort of stuff. And it's almost like the tension, it's how we have this conversation about black art. It's like the social tension has made this great art. And so the social tension is making these great characters in these weird horror books. And so far, they've been pretty good. The ones I read.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm excited to jump into more of them. Thanks for pointing some of those out to me. I think on the flip side of this, going back to Rosemary's Baby and Stepford Wives, both of those movies are based on books written by Ira Levin, who's a dude, and then Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, the movie was written and directed by white men. And so, we had these social thrillers, these precursors, these movies that Jordan Peele looked to for direct inspiration were created by people other than the social situations that the movies were and books were addressing. Whereas here we have a social thriller about race by someone who reads as black, which is pretty significant. And then, of course, what's very significant is like how crazy successful this film has been, like how much it's resonated with people.
$252 million worth of resonation, or resonance.
Damn. And, it is socially charged, but it's also really fun. It's a fun thriller. Like, it's brutal, and there's a lot of points in it that sit really hard afterwards, but like, it's a well-crafted movie that moves really well. It's thrilling.
Yeah, and if you're really immersed in this stuff, like, in our Babadook episode, we talked about how basically if you're a modern cool horror director, you got to be super into Kubrick, super into Hitchcock, and super into Argento. And this movie has all of that. There are scenes, like, there's a really great, if you're really into this movie and you really are a fan of Jordan Peele, I think Chris Hardwick's interview with him on the Nerdist, he does two. There's a part one and a part two. I don't think anybody could have gotten a better interview out of him for this, but he really kind of breaks down how much is like, this is a straight up Hitchcock shot. Like the scene where the groundskeeper is running full blast at him. It's from, was it North by Northwest or something like that? Yeah. Like of just the unsettlingness of like a film camera reads a thing coming at it very strangely, and it makes something weird happen to the human eye. And he just uses that. Like, it's just picked up. And there's another scene where the main character is, it's the only moment in the movie where there's a voiceover. He's like, man, these people are crazy. And it's like a voiceover, and it's totally like a Rosemary's Baby moment. There's just so many really clever homages to, dude has like a PhD in weird film fiction.
Sure.
And that's what I think sets this movie apart.
Oh, totally. And what I think is interesting about this being a genre film, in addition to it being, let's keep saying, social thriller, is that with genre films, people are often very protective of their territory. Like, nerds are fucking ready to fight for their territory and always have been. And that's part of, I feel like, the definition of a nerd. But this movie has that, and it has this race component. And so people are super charged about their opinions about it and what is right and wrong about it, that has given it this life of its own that is super combative on so many levels. And it's partly troubling, but also partly really fascinating as well. The amount of dialogue that it's spawned has been amazing.
Yeah, and that was one of the quotes from Jordan Peele that I really liked. Was he said, "I want people to talk about race, and I want them to talk about horror," and he put those two things together. And it's interesting, like the people who want to talk about this movie, it being a horror movie, sort of filters out a group of people. So if you're having a conversation about Get Out, no matter what the race of the other person is, you're talking to another horror fan. So it does this really nice trick of putting anyone who watched and enjoyed this movie on the same level playing field. And then from there, you can actually have like a pretty decent conversation about what's talked about in race. Like everybody knows that white guy who's like, oh man, Obama, Tiger Woods, I love him. I just love him. And that's like the most cringy shit in this movie. And it's just perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something else that I really loved about this movie is that, like we talked about in our conversation about 10 Cloverfield Lane, where I was saying like there's such an economy of content in the film. Mm-hmm. Like in 10 Cloverfield Lane, every word and every object that's interacted with, there's a callback, or it's referencing something, or it's a metaphor. And Get Out is ever more so. The tea or the silver spoon, or when Rose is drinking milk through a black straw, or the bocce ball, or, you know, Jesse Owens, or referring to like, oh, there's black mold in the basement, but then it turns out there's actually a mold for black people in the basement. Everything that gets said or happens or is seen is reflected somewhere else in the film, or has a deeper meaning and resonance.
Yeah.
So it's, to my mind, going back to our Stranger Things episode, where I was like, yeah, but once you know all these references in Stranger Things, what do you got? This is the antithesis of that in a way that I really like. You can keep catching these things as they fly by upon multiple watches, and it brings more life to the film.
Yeah, there's a bunch of little things, like, you know, for instance, they're having this conversation about how the grandfather, who's no longer with him, or at least in the way that he was, ran in the 1936 Olympics.
Yep.
And he's like, oh, he just never really got over it.
Yep.
Literally never got over it. Like, he's got himself a really fast black body to run in now, and he just runs at night in his clothes. It's super weird.
Right.
Totally bizarre. And there's another moment where they, right when they enter the kitchen, and they're like, oh, you know, it's like our mother never left us.
Or like a little piece of her, and then, well, where's the piece you're talking about? Well, she's standing right there. Yeah, exactly. And what I appreciate about all of these things is that, I mean, Jordan Peele, he did the fucking promo circuit. Like, he was on every podcast and TV show and blog and everything. And first of all, he gives a great interview, but also he's super forthcoming about this stuff. Like, he doesn't pull the, I'm going to refer to another Scary Thoughts episode, Neon Demon, like Refn, who is like intolerable in interviews. He's so pretentious, and he's overdoing the Kubrick mystique thing that it backfires. But Jordan Peele, he's just like, yeah, this happened, and then this happened, and I was thinking about this, and then, you know, and I don't know if you listen to the commentary, but like, he just lays it all out, just plain as day. And I'm totally into that. It's like interviews with Jordan Peele is like a YouTube analysis, like a millennial fast talking analysis video. Just like everything you ever wanted to know about Get Out by Jordan Peele. Yeah.
And it's interesting. Like, there aren't that many of those videos for this. And you can't help but wonder if it's just Jordan Peele did it. And that's it, you know. And then the other part of it, you know, being a person who's been into occult shit for a very long time, it's not the most hardcore, like really deep symbolism. It's out there, you know what I mean? Like, anybody who had like casual interest in like general and Illuminati stuff. And I think it's actually so casual. I was surprised to see like conspiracy websites that I like. I mean, like real deal crazy, like flat earth reptile elite conspiracy sites aren't that interested in this movie. They're like, yeah, of course, it's just basic bitch shit. You know, this is all stuff that you should have learned in high school. Come on, you know. Like, there's this one site in particular called
is Jordan, like, as in Jordan Peele is a reptile, like that,
like as
that,
in,
that is obvious.
Well, no, that everything in the movie is just like white belt conspiracy theory shit, and then like of course you should know that they're already switching bodies and shit like that. That's an old thing, you know. Or like the stag is the symbol of an occult order. Of course, come on, you know, like everybody knows this. But there's one site I really love called Vigilant Citizen, and they're like, I think they're the prime source for where all the Jay-Z, Beyonce, Illuminati stuff comes from. So they're pretty good at doing the breakdowns, and they have a really pretty, like, one of the better descriptions of symbols in Eyes Wide Shut that you can read, like all the Star of Ishtar stuff and Christmas lights and sex cults. I mean, they did a pretty good job, but they were not interested in Get Out.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So
are we done? We're out of shit to talk about already.
Yeah, like just go listen to a Jordan Peele conversation.
Yeah, that's pretty much.
Well, one thing I wanted to talk about is to think about Get Out. I think you're going to bristle at this. Is to think about Get Out as a zombie film, a pre-Romero zombie film. And the reason why I say that is connecting this movie not to Night of the Living Dead, 28 Days Later, etc., but to the history of Haiti and its history with slavery. I'm thinking, in particular, just as a point of reference, there's this book that's not published yet called Undead Uprising, Haiti Horror and the Zombie Complex by John Cousins.
Do you realize how intolerable it is to quote a book that's not out yet?
Yeah.
Like you're that cool.
I was just going to... No, I was... Well,
there's this book you haven't read it yet because it's not out
yet. I was going to just talk about the ideas in it, but I couldn't not say where I got these ideas because they are not... totally I mean, he doesn't mention Get Out. It's just, shut the fuck up. So, God damn it. Okay, so in, like, zombies originated in Haiti, right? And Haiti was possibly the first country on planet Earth to outlaw slavery. But zombies were part of voodoo. You know, historically, zombies were not these autonomous automatons like they are in current movies. They were possessed. They were possessions. And then we get Night of the Living Dead, which interestingly is a zombie, but it's a different kind of zombie, but it's still connected to race. Like that movie is actually another social thriller. Probably the first zombie movie was White Zombie from 1932, and that takes place in Haiti. And there's this one moment where the coach driver explains to this white couple in the middle of the night, referring to these like ambling bodies, "They are not men, monsieur. They are dead bodies, zombies, the living dead, corpses taken from their graves who are made to work in sugar mills and fields at night." And the main story is about the zombification and possession of a white woman's body so a plantation owner can have control over her. So Get Out is exactly like these early pre-Romero zombie films. It's linked to the history of slavery and gentrification, and it's about controlling a body. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting that it's sort of a zombie movie, but going back to ye olde days of what a zombie originally actually was and what zombie films originally were about.
Yeah. I mean, okay, yeah, you're right. I am going to bristle a little bit about the zombie thing, mainly because to me, like that zombie doesn't really exist anymore. So
sure.
But I mean, if you were talking about
that, and I'm not talking about it is part of the zombie genre. I'm just like, oh wow, this movie, the way it functions is like zombies actually are in the world. Before we decided that they're the reanimated dead that eat your brains.
Yeah. I mentioned that mainly just to get it out that I could totally be prejudiced by that, you know. But I feel like there's a difference between what the old zombie movies are doing where you're mobilizing, you're either turning somebody into a zombie as some sort of metaphor for like this is what just the work life is like, so you're a zombie. The things you're doing are zomborific. That kind of ties, in some ways, like Dawn of the Dead is closer to that than the original Night of the Living Dead. Then it's like almost like the zombies like this piece of capitalism, whereas in Get Out, there's more of like a desire, like probably what some people will call like there's like almost like a negrophilia at play here. I mean, not almost. I mean, that's basically what the movie's about.
Yeah.
And I feel like that slight difference makes a difference. Plus also like the fact that like there is a consciousness and control of the body, whereas like the old zombies, the consciousness is dulled. Right. And so I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I get what you're saying. And I think that that's the whole idea of like who's controlling what and why is pretty interesting. But there's just it's almost like in my brain, my like dungeon master monster manual is going like, this is clearly a different creature.
That is not a mind flayer,
like,
clearly.
Yeah, like having this like difficult, like obviously you don't know the difference between a red and a turquoise dragon. Like, yeah, it's like that part of my brain is fired up too. So I don't know that I can engage with it fairly.
So I want to talk about collective dread.
Sure.
Liberals. There. So
is that my signal to go on the attack?
No, just, yeah,
like,
no,
am I
maybe
supposed to go in?
Well, just when we talk about horror films and think about like what are we all currently anxious about? What is the state of the union, and how are horror films sort of like exposing that? And I think what this film does quite deftly is it points out the complicity of white liberalism, and it does it really well by, in particular, getting Catherine Keener and Bradley Whitford to play racist villains in this movie. Good casting. But, it also calls out wokeness as being this kind of sort of a lie, or at least it calls into question its authenticity.
Yeah. And what I like what you've brought up about the wokeness thing, because it's like, it's really, like, to my mind, really new thing. I mean, like, it used to be just called like being smart, but it also came along with like kind of keeping to yourself. Like there was like, you would be aware, and I'm thinking more like 90s backpack hip hop people, like, headphones on, like thinking about shit really hard, like walking down the halls of school or something like that. And like, there's like almost like a performativity that people have picked up on is ringing false. So when you're like, man, I love Obama, would have voted for him 7 times, like that sort of thing. It's like, like no one's that into Obama, like, so for you to be like that super fired. I mean, I know some people are, but you know what I mean? Like, it's like at the end of the day, it's like another president, and like to be like super, super crazy about this one figure, it's just weird, or to only be able to talk to somebody about one particular cult. I mean, like, I for sure have given my terrible ear beatings to some unfortunate person about the Wu-Tang Clan or something like that. And, part of it's like, oh, you want to connect. And part of it, you don't realize how fucking stupid you're being. And part of it is you just like this thing so much and you've run into somebody else who does. So now it's time to talk about it. And I think that if you're approaching it with something that you really do enjoy, people don't mind. But when you're talking about stuff that you think you're supposed to talk about and you don't really feel it, I think it reads as false, and like people don't like really care about all this shit. Like who even watches golf, I mean, maybe a lot of people do. I have no idea. Like, so for me, I would have to even care about golf in the first place to care about Tiger Woods.
Well, I think that's what's fascinating about this movie is that at the garden party, all of these moments that are like super cringeworthy, they are what they are, but they're not. Like talking about Tiger Woods is not bonding with the black guy over the only black connection to golf that any white person can come up with. It's that he's test driving the merchandise.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like when the woman with the wheelchair bound husband is squeezing his bicep and sizing up what sex with him could be like. But I also think that, speaking of wokeness, what is really interesting is the way that works with the main white characters. Like Rose in particular, when she's bitching about her parents in private and she goes, what's the difference between them and that cop?
Right.
Like, she's so woke for someone who, it all being an act.
She's a woke
amazing.
Black Widow. Like she uses her wokeness as like a tool to like undermine these other people's lives. Like she gets in there, she gets a black lesbian girlfriend at one point. You got to be like fucking in deep to pull that off, I imagine.
Right.
And it's like just her ability to like stand up for the cop, even though she's probably really trying to keep a paper trail of him being there. It's not so much that she's standing up for him, it's that she's trying to like
keep him off the grid.
Yeah. But he is sort of like, he really appreciates it, and he's sort of like kind of turned on by it or whatever. So like he is tricked by it. And I think like, I mean, how many fucking rapist male feminists do you need to catch out there to realize that when somebody's really putting on an act in something, it's probably a little weird. And I think this movie really kind of plays on that. And then it also acknowledges that, like, sometimes stereotypes give you, like, a point of reference in the world, because it's basically how Rod saves the day. You know, he's a TSA agent, and he puts these, like, you know, like TSA agent stereotypes. Like, he's like, I think it's going to be old ladies are going to be in the next terrorist group. So he's only, like, patting down old ladies. And he has this weird intuition that's based on non-PC-ness. You know what I mean? Like, at the very end of the movie, he's like, I told you shouldn't have gone in that house. I mean, that's actually a fairly, like, racist sort of thing. Like, oh, you should never go in that group of people's houses ever.
Right. And
it's fucking hilarious. And he's right in this particular case. But he's basically the hero. I mean, he's not the protagonist, but he saves the day, right?
Totally. I mean, well, also, if we can do a callback to a frequent topic of conversation, like, if there's any hypersanity in this film, it's Rod. He's the one who, like, can think through and past all the bullshit.
Yeah.
But the fact that he's a TSA agent is really, like, on one hand, that's really funny. TSA, everybody hates the TSA.
Right.
Everybody fucking hates the TSA. But the powers that the TSA have emboldened in this character makes him the savior.
Yeah. Do you think Jordan Peele has to wait in line at the airport anymore, or they just wave his ass through?
Like, TSA just gave him a private jet.
Yeah, it's like how, like, Sylvester Stallone could probably go to any boxing match for free.
Right, totally.
You know, Jordan Peele is like the hero of the TSA.
Totally. Well, I think also the choice of the TSA is an interesting way of having a cop who's not a cop. I mean, it functions obviously as the twist at the very end when we get the flashing lights, but it's also a way to have a cop who's not a cop. And of course, the TSA, I mean, they pride themselves on being racially diverse. So it is this kind of, although he does go and talk to a bunch of cops and they're also people of color.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty, I thought the scene with the cops is particularly interesting because it's like, I couldn't get my head around quite like what their role is in the movie. Like, they're like, it's like Rod is a particular type of conspiracy theorist. Like, he's like the type of dude that would read Vigilant Citizen and tell you some wild shit, you know, that he, like, maybe toying with the idea of like a flat earther phenomenon or something like that. Not a dumb guy, like a really smart dude who's just gone off on his own way. Then he runs into actual authority. And it's weird that the actual authority is sort of, it's a combination of indifference and disbelief. Like, they just are not even willing to investigate the idea of this strange order of people who are, like, abducting people and turning them into sex slaves.
Yep.
You know? And he's totally not really off on his theory.
No.
Yeah.
The most ridiculous things he says are true.
Yeah. I mean,
awesome.
I think he's definitely the standout character of this movie. I mean, definitely my favorite parts of the movie involved him.
Oh, totally. So I want to, actually, I was sort of emailing with a friend of mine, and I just wanted to kind of like pull something he said. My friend Keith Hennessy, I'm just going to, hi Keith. There's a little more context to what he said than I'm going to give, but I'm bringing this up in around like Rose and her pose and her wokeness. But Keith said, some would say that all anti-racist behavior is fake imposter because structural racism and privilege trump all personal behavior. Good white folks can say anything, even challenge a cop. Defending a black person can endanger them further, but we don't actually divest in whiteness's privileges. Anyway, I thought that was a really interesting way to think about this idea of like, yeah, it doesn't actually matter what you do. This shit's still happening. You can try to be the good white person, but actually that's just a drop in the bucket.
Yeah, one of the criticisms that people had for this movie, like, and I think these are 9-volt brain criticisms, are like, well, how come there weren't any good white people in it? Like, you hear people like complain about that, and there was this
because really, it wouldn't have been as good a movie.
Well, also, like, what role is there to play? There's not a spot for that.
No, that's
like,
what I mean.
Even in the script, I mean, I guess you could have made, I mean, you could have made Rod white, I guess, like his white friend, but I mean, there's literally no other space in this movie for that.
Well, no, I mean, what's funny is that turns that white person's complaint into, say, someone saying, well, there aren't any trans people in this movie that we know of. Where's the trans visibility? Where's the white visibility? Where's the good white visibility? It's like, well,
right.
You know,
the same kind
this
of,
is a story.
Yeah, the same kind of person that would like make that dumb argument, like, well, where's this particular type of character? It's like asking for a type of representation, right? And it's that same person would balk at, well, you made Iron Man black now, great, you know, and then I might balk for that for different reasons because I think it might be lazy writing or they're trying to catch like a demographic wave or something like that, but. Yeah, there's just no call for it. Even the fucking dude from the Proud Boys, Gavin McInnes, he did a video about how you should just shut the fuck up and enjoy this movie because it's not racist. He's like, a movie can be absent a complete character type because in that story, that character type isn't there. You know, there's not...
Wow, even the National Review didn't even take that long.
Yeah, I mean, but like, I think that just goes to show you that like everybody really recognized what was cool about this movie. It wasn't like it was banging on white people. It was really affirming cool black characters more than anything else, you know? And then I think this movie references Eyes Wide Shut a couple times, you know, talking about sex slaves and stuff like that. But I think one of the answers to that whole, like, well, where are white people in this? They're just anywhere. It's just American experience. Like, you should be able to experience this movie through the eyes of the black character. And that's kind of one of the deals with this particular actor and why he was chosen was because he has sort of relatability. Like in his episode in Black Mirror, it's really easy to put, for some weird reason, it's really easy to put yourself in his place. Like he's sort of, I hate familiar. The expression,
but he's sort of an everyman, but he also has this innocence to his persona that really draws you in and identify with him.
Yeah. And he's such a really, you know, not a totally unknown character, but he hasn't played, I mean, this is really like a pretty cool thing, but he hasn't like played any like stereotype characters, right? So he's not bringing in like Omar from The Wire is always going to be Omar from The Wire.
Right.
Like whenever I see him, I think he's going to fucking murder somebody. And the fact that that's his character in like 5 different series kind of does it. So I think,
and even like when he's in Community, which is a comedy, that is lurking over his character.
Yeah, it's always there. And so I think that was one of the things that was like really smart casting in this movie. And even like the character actors, like the white character actors, they're in roles that you don't really normally think of them in. Like the guy who's the blind character is not really a villain character. Like he's in comedies a lot, you know? So he's also, I think maybe after Rod, my second favorite character in this movie. I think he's the most interesting white persona in this movie because like he sort of represents that kind of callousness of like that sort of color blindness that is just like fuck you color blindness. Like I just don't even care enough to care about these differences. And so he just cares about his eye. You know, he's like, look, I could give a shit. You could be any race. I don't care. I like your eye. And so I think one of the reasons why he's willing to outbid everyone else by so much, like you remember in the bidding scene, it's like 6, whatever that means. And then it goes to 10 and he's like, I'll fucking pay it. And I think there's a lot of discussion online about like how much the amount is that they're selling. I think it's in the millions.
I thought it was 10 million.
Yeah, I would think 10 million too. I think that like otherwise it just wouldn't even be worth doing.
Right.
You know, because you got to catch somebody, you got to make them disappear.
Yep.
But that character is, in a weird way, he's like a post-racial villain, sort of like.
Well, see, to my mind, I think that is, if that is true, then maybe everybody in this movie is a post-racial villain, because I think what's complicated about the way racial difference functions in this film is that there's no hate. There's no, traditional Confederate can't give up on slavery racism.
Right.
There's all this admiration. They're shopping with, like when you see grandma looking in the mirror, she's looking at a beautiful face that she bought.
Yeah.
I think the one exception that is a little weird is the brother.
Yeah.
There's something different about the way he regards Chris. Everybody seems fascinated and in love with Chris and intoxicated maybe by all black bodies. But he seems to be maybe jealous, or like he's young and jealous, or he's still young and competitive. Like he wants to like he's wanting to fight Chris, maybe to prove himself that he's still worthy of being part of the family. You know, he was able to get Andre, but maybe Rose is doing a better job in chalking them up. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, because you imagine, like, he has to, like, lure people in and then physically overcome them, right?
Yeah.
And he looks to be about my size. Yeah. So he looks like he's 150, 160 pounds, something like that. And, like, not a physically powerful dude. So even with his fucking probably blue belt level jiu-jitsu, his method of just catching is not as good as the other method of, like, choosing. Right. And, like, you know, because, like, she's brought in, you know, he has a talent on top of the simple body thing. Right. And, you know, like, I was thinking about a lot, like, about whether or not these characters are, like, racist the way people get called out on Twitter for being racist. I don't think they are. I think these people, like, all these villains that are bidding on his body, like, they could have easily said, go get me some fucking Norwegian. You know, you know, I want to put my brain into a Norwegian body, you know,
into a Viking.
Yeah. Some sort of Viking dude. And to my mind, like, I mean, I'd rather have, like, some Samoan genetics, like The Rock, you know, if you were able to choose, right? Like, to me, that's the thing. If you're going to be the biggest and coolest,
you're going down a terrible path right now, Chad.
Well, I'm just saying that, like, I think that there's something beyond simple racism at play with their choice of only black bodies. Oh, yeah. You know, and it's interesting that they're all part of this old order. And so what this would maybe even point to me is, like, all the, like, the ancient order stuff where, like, it's all supposed to come from Africa originally. So, like, what I was thinking was, like, this ancient order had somehow, like, seized power, but want to put, like, their power back into, like, the black bodies. And, like, that would create some sort of, like, Ubermensch sort of thing. And they even say as much in the weird television thing. Is like, you know, our go-getterism and your natural talents will combine to make this thing. And it's like, it's almost some weird Raiders of the Lost Ark, like, Nazi occult shit. Right. Like, it's like, and to me, that's the Jordan Peele touch, is like, yes, there's the race element here, but it's even weirder. You know, it's like a high order, like, esoteric occult racism. It's even crazier than normal racism.
Yeah. Yeah. This guy drives around in a white Porsche with a Knights Templar helmet and abducts black men.
Totally crazy. And more on that character, I mean, like, it's so smart how, like, in pretty much every scene, he's wielding, like, a white object incredibly menacing. Like he has the lacrosse stick, which everybody talks about, like, definitely a white sport. The helmet he has on, like, I mean, that helmet I mostly associate with Monty Python. Sure. But still, you know, it's like a Knights Templar helmet. And then even when he's playing the ukulele, which is like white girl magic, it's like totally has this, like, weird deliverance feel.
I never thought of white girl magic. That's great.
But yeah, I mean, he's such an interesting character. And you also, I don't know if you picked up on this, but he's almost doing, like, a Brad Pitt impression sometimes, like, his sort of, like, weird
mumbling and looking off in odd directions.
Yeah. And is, like, pointing with his fingers really hard.
Oh, wow.
And stuff like that. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, but I just read this Tobias Wolff book called Old School, and it's kind of about an old white prep school where, like, Hemingway would come and give a talk at. And I mean, this is another level of, like, Jordan Peele just really nailing these characters perfectly. Is, like, how sloppy the brother is. Like, he's really disheveled. That was, like, kind of in the prep school days of the 50s and 60s, like, high order rich. Like, you were, like, so fucking rich, your boat shoes were just busted to pieces and you just didn't care to replace them. And it was, like, the poorer, lower class kids that were, like, super tight and super buttoned up. Yeah.
That's interesting. I went to, I won't totally name names, but there's only one person on planet Earth I'm about to talk about. Yeah, I went to art school with Paul Verhoeven's daughter, and she was the dirtiest, smelliest person at an art school. Mm-hmm. So much point to prove, and point proved, you know. Anyway, so did you think there was any element of this film that was sort of like the Yara's clamshell e-reader, the sort of, like, thing that stuck out like a sore thumb, and the puzzle piece that didn't fit?
Honestly, the fucking candles in the surgery room Like that was a thing that was kind of a little weird and didn't fit to me.
Yeah. Because to me, it was the Japanese character, Hiroki Tanaka.
Well, somewhere I read that Japanese character was specifically included due to some sort of like Chicago race riot or something like that. That like Japanese people were complicit with white people at some point. That was one person's read on it, which I don't think is it at all. And then another person said that character kind of stands for Asian privilege, and that like there's like this sort of past.
Sure.
And then I feel like I heard Jordan Peele say that he wanted to mention, like, you know, in Japan, like people have been doing blackface forever.
Yeah.
And no one seems to like, it's just so weird that people don't even know how to address complaining about it or something like that. Like I remember when I first saw Rachel Dolezal, I wasn't so blown away by it because I had seen like an old Vice documentary or something about that, about all these young kids in Japan that take chemicals to darken their skin. And so I just had thought that was already a crazy thing that people did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think Rachel Dolezal liked this movie or not?
Dude, I'm so...
Like, I would love to watch this movie with her and say, so, what do you think?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, because one, she's highly educated in all this stuff. Like, say what you want to say about, like, her being white or whatever. She really loves this shit.
She's as woke can be.
Yeah. Like, I mean, like, I bet she would actually probably write a pretty good paper about it.
Totally.
I mean, not the best paper, but
and nobody'd publish it.
Yeah. You think Zero Books would publish it? Like just
Oh my God. So I want to talk about shifting, which is like similar to how we talk about gender as I don't mean you and I. The way in which we talk about gender as a performance, like the Judith Butler way of thinking about gender, Black people shift, skewing their identities to accommodate the world around them. Like it's a way of compromising their authentic self by shifting to get by within white culture. There have been like books and articles written about this concept. So, you know, oftentimes when an African American is talking to another Black person versus a bunch of white people, like how do they shift their personality and tone down certain aspects of their personality? And Chris demonstrates this in the film when he greets Andrew Logan / Andre at the party, you know, and he's like, good to see another brother here, or whatever he says. And interestingly, of course, formerly Andre totally fails to connect because he's barely Black anymore.
Right.
That authenticity, that real person is kind of gone. He's basically talking to a white man. But what's also interesting is the way in which this film holds up a light to the way in which, like, the dad shifts, right? When the dad is like this thing, like he's trying to
he gets
down.
Worse. Yeah.
That's sort of a shifting thing. And Rose does it as well. Like after they drive away from the cop and she goes, I'm not going to let anyone fuck with my man.
Right.
You know, and it's like that whole my man thing. She's kind of maybe trying to shift to how a Black woman would talk about her boyfriend.
Yeah. It's a little...
And it's really uncomfortable.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's so weird. Like, I worked in this hip hop club for a really, really long time and like love all that music, like fucking watched all like House Party and like Break Into, like all the shit that like a white kid would have access to that would turn them into like a down white dude wearing like baggy pants and shit like that. And for some reason, I just never felt like you should perform like that. Like it's like my cousin one, like for like a year was like super down with NWA and like his vocal tones changed for a little bit, which is hilarious because he's a cop now. But yeah, it's weird, man. It's weird. But I think that people do it all kinds of different ways. Like I've seen, you know, when I would be bartending in the Castro, like an entire wedding party become gay men, you know, like a bachelorette party. So I think that shifting happens all the time. I imagine that there's probably some sort of like primate reason why people do it, but it does seem particularly corny when people try to do like Black culture. And, I actually know why I probably never did it, because of the scene in Weird Science where Anthony Michael Hall is like trying to bro down in the jazz club.
Yes.
That scene, like when I was a little kid, like it was so uncomfortable for me to watch it. Like it was really like one of those things that like I would have to fast forward as a kid, because it was just, I don't even know why. Like it just struck me as like the worst fucking nerdy thing I had ever seen in my entire life.
Yeah.
And I think it just stuck with me that I never wanted
Just
to be
don't
like
do
that
that.
guy
Yeah.
ever. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. What did you think about the two different endings? Like, so people who have maybe just watched this movie casually might not know. There was an original darker ending filmed where the main character ends up in jail, and basically Rod comes to see him and is like, "Hey man, we're going to try and get you out." He's like, "I stopped them," and that's good enough. So the whole thing was like he won, but he lost.
Yeah.
And then this ending is a happy ending.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I like this ending better.
Me too.
I mean, just
Yeah.
it's a better movie. Also, we need a hero. And, I mean, going back to Night of the Living Dead, that ending that did not get used is like the ending of Night of the Living Dead. Like this black man perseveres, white guy shoots him dead.
Yeah.
Roll credits. This movie did not need that, and I think it's stronger. And if we want to talk, I think it's hard to say that this movie has a message. It's political and it's socially conscious, but I don't think there's a message. But I think that message is delivered with more strength by having him persevere, by having him survive, by he and Rod combining to create a transformer.
Yeah. I mean, and also there's the thing of like, in the spirit of Phantasm 2, you don't know that it doesn't go all fucking bad like 5 minutes later, because they have just killed an entire high-level family of a secret order in the middle of the woods, in the middle of like New England or wherever the fuck they are. It's actually Mississippi in real life, but I guess it's supposed to be the East Coast. But, like they're covered in blood. There's dead bodies everywhere. I know he didn't like
Wipe his fingerprints and DNA from everything.
Yeah, especially her neck, and then, Rod, I'm sure they don't let you take the TSA car, and especially after you've just talked to cops and told this crazy fucking story, so it's like, okay, it's even with the happy ending, you could imagine it not going really well for them like a few minutes later.
Right.
Which is fine. But I think that the levity at the end of it, it's one of those things I talk about with people. It's like, okay, say the world is as bad as your like anarchist protester says it is. What are you going to do? It seems like just, showing up at a Milo protest with a black can and some fireworks is not enough. If you really do believe all this shit, like how hard are you going to be willing to go? And I think the happy ending lets you realize that, like, okay, maybe there is like a happy way out, not just like total death and denial. It's like a non-nihilist ending in a genre that is full of nihilism. The original ending, though, with him in jail, though, does sort of affirm what Jordan Peele said this movie was about. You're like, oh, I don't know what it's about, but he has said in interviews that he wants people to really they're like, what's the one thing you want people to walk away with? And he says, I want people to think about the incarceration of black bodies.
Yes.
And I think that point is made much more explicit near the end.
By seeing him in a prison.
Yeah.
Totally.
And so you're wondering, like, it's that thing where you see, like in Cabin in the Woods, you see one monster cage and then you see 100 of them. You're like, oh, how many of these things are in here? Like, so at the end, you look at this prison cell and there's other men around him and you're like, how many of these other people's stories like go off into the fucking wild west and have ended up with them there and they shouldn't have been, so it sort of makes that parallel. So that ending, I don't know, I feel like that original ending would have made this movie an Oscar contender. And
interesting.
And the happy ending just makes it less serious.
And it makes people, it's often branded as like a thriller comedy. Like, no, it's not. But if it ended badly, no one would say that. Yeah,
because the ending the movie with Rod ends, it's like that whole classic thing. Like when you leave a restaurant, what's the last thing you experience is what you're going to think about that restaurant. The last thing you think of with Get Out is like, oh, that's a pretty funny movie. Like, I mean, even though it's not really through the whole thing, like, but like the last laugh to me is so good.
Yeah, it's true.
Just the whole thing, and it doesn't even stop. There's like subtle jokes. There's like full on jokes. There's the gag of the door.
Yeah.
You know, just the first thing he says too is like, "I told you shouldn't have gone in that house." It's so fucking funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe moving into more horror film territory, let's talk villainous trifling. You know, I think this movie, what?
Oh, I was going to say, like, the exposition and the villainy, like, of what's going on, it's done really well in this movie.
That's where I was going, is that, like, it has the thing where the villain explains the whole backstory to the main character, but it's awesome.
Yeah, like
he watches this really weird movie, and it's explained in this really, really idiosyncratic way that doesn't give him information to stop the plot. Mm-hmm. Right? He just needs to survive. It's not a Bond villain explaining the plan, and then Bond can go and stop the plan. It's just like, well, here's what you don't actually know, and here's what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't give him information that helps him survive. Everything he does from that point on is just pure survival. Yeah,
and I love... It's such a cheat. The way he does it, he's like, well, they say that this makes the brain melding process go better.
Great.
He's like, I could tell you don't give a fuck. And like that line, man, that particular little moment in the film, to me, is Jordan Peele winking at the real audience for this film. You know, like he's saying, he's doing the thing where what I was talking about in a couple movies ago is nowadays people are so literate in what horror is and what horror tropes are that, like, when somebody does something exceptionally cheesy, there's no way no one told them it wasn't cheesy. Like, more often than not, it seems like they're probably doing it on purpose, like to be like, look at me winking. But no one's done it this well. You know, like, he's giving you a cheesy exposition moment, and he's telling you it's this cheesy exposition moment.
Right.
Yeah, and in a weird way, it means that this movie checks all the classic boxes.
Yeah.
Like, it's not missing anything.
Yeah. So what do you not like about this movie? Where did it come up short for you? Well, if anywhere.
Well, one thing I really loved, but before we move on, is I love I can still hate Allison Williams. Like,
really?
I was really worried that, like, I hate her as Marnie. I just wanted her to fucking die. And I was
That's because she's such a good actress.
Yeah, well, you know, who knows? But anyway, I remember when the first couple minutes of this film was like, oh no, she's going to be a really sweet character, and I'm going to have to, like, change how I feel about this actress instead of just, like, hating her and, like, in a weird reptile brain TMZ way.
Right.
You know, just she's like the worst friend on Girls and does everyone wrong all the time. It's the worst character ever, and is also the worst character ever. Because she like breaks this dude's heart and tries to turn him into a zombie.
She breaks his heart and tries to steal his body.
Yeah, it's really rude.
Well, I will say the one thing that really kind of blew my mind is near the end when she's on that phone call with Rod, and her voice, when it cuts away from her, she's talking like this and she's animated and but when they cut back to her, her face is like stone cold mannequin. Mm-hmm. And she was able to vocally give this like it doesn't fool Rod, because Rod sees through everything.
Yeah.
Because he's hyper sane. But she gives this really engaged, realistic performance for the phone, but she's just completely dead. She's not with Chris anymore.
You can't trust a person that can do that. You know what I mean? Like, you just can't. You just never know.
She's so evil. You know, her hair's up in a ponytail. She's drinking milk and eating Fruit Loops separately.
Yeah.
Actually, apparently they referred to her as Roro. Like, there's kind of Rose's two characters in this film. She's Rose, which is who Chris fell in love with. And as soon as the keys are revealed, you know, I can't give you these, babe, or whatever, then it's Roro. And that's who she really is, which is the psychopathic, manipulative, indoctrinated person who is raised to be dead inside.
Yeah, she's pretty terrible.
She's bad.
I mean,
lady.
she's great, but, like, you know, a really good villain. I mean, I think she'll... It's almost too bad that there's the brother and the sister, and they didn't get a little bit more, because they were almost like perfect like villains, you could almost see like an earlier them as like 13-year-olds,
right?
Like how they got trained into being such evil order people. Like that would be a crazy movie.
This movie begs. I mean, it doesn't beg for a prequel because I think please just leave this movie alone. Yeah. But it asks so many questions about, especially her. Like, how the fuck did she get there? You know, who is she? It's horrible.
Yeah, well, this is one of the interesting things about Jordan Peele doing Lovecraft Country is that there is an ancient order in Lovecraft Country that has divisions, and you could totally imagine it would take almost no effort to retcon this particular branch of their order into a branch of an order in Lovecraft Country. It would fit really, really well. And I think Jordan Peele is too smart to like pull those two things together without a really great reason. Like I think that they weren't part of each other originally, I think would make that weird. Like I don't think a real deal horror fan would want to it'd be like saying like, oh, there's greasers in The Outsiders, and one of the characters in Monster Squad is a greaser. Therefore, there's monsters in The Outsiders.
Have you seen the movie Split yet?
No, is that what that is?
I am not going to spoil it, but it there's a reveal at the end that is so fucking pathetic. Never mind.
Yeah. But I guess I completely ignored your question. I'm sorry. What didn't I think was done so well? Jordan Peele talked a lot about like using the house like Kubrick used the Overlook Hotel. Yeah. And I just didn't get that at all. I think that maybe the architecture of the house wasn't that particularly New Englandy and scary or something like
Sometimes
that.
he uses like depth of field and a certain color palette and extreme symmetry. But as an object, but you know, I can see him thinking like, okay, we're going to treat the house like an entity, and there are all these parts that get revealed over time.
Yeah, and then knowing that he's referencing certain movies that do that, I just thought that it wasn't that strong. You know, like if I hadn't heard him say that, I would have never picked up on the idea of the house as a place, which is interesting because like in the Stepford Wives and in Rosemary's Baby in particular, like the apartment trilogy stuff, like the place is really the deal, and like it could have been anywhere. You know,
I think that to my mind, the only thing, you know, when I say this, it's not that I think that this movie came up short. It's more like an aspect I only give an 8 out of a 10 instead of a 10 out of a 10.
Yeah.
But the script, I think, was fucking impeccable. He worked on it for 8 years. The acting was like bananas good. Everyone in this film
everybody's
was just
great.
God damn it. But it was shot very quickly on a quite modest budget. And I think that aspect gives us visual and sound aesthetics that are, it looked great. And a lot of the music was actually really interesting.
Yeah.
But it wasn't quite at the level of the acting and the writing to my mind. So that might, you know, I wonder if he had like $30 million to make this film, that would have been the fucking Overlook Hotel.
Yeah, you wonder if he had the money to lock up like a mansion or something really extra cool looking for like 6 months of shooting or something like that. Or
fake one so he could manipulate the space and get better shots, better compositions, better lighting.
Yeah, I think other than the moments, I mean, this is one too that I would maybe say as a criticism is there are moments where you really notice what the camera's doing because it's hypersymmetrical.
Yeah.
Almost everything else is ignorable. Like it could be Meet the Fockers, the way some of it's shot. It's really like there's nothing like super interesting about the camera movement.
Right. I mean, it's not a Medea movie.
No, it's definitely not a Medea movie. So having seen the low end, it's not there. And again, we're talking about like, okay, what would have made this movie like 100% fucking for sure on Rotten Tomatoes? No problem. Everyone agrees. And I think, there's just some filmcraft stuff. But even then, like, what do 4 movies from now look like for Jordan Peele? I mean, if you look at the difference between The Grand Budapest and Bottle Rocket, like you can tell, like Bottle Rocket's fucking great. Like
or Kubrick's first film.
Yeah. Yeah. And to me, it's like almost the Jordan Peele from 15 years from now, who will be a master. you want to see his version of this movie. But this is his version of this movie. You know, it's the movie that gets him to whatever the next thing is.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much he's going to be involved with it, but producing Lovecraft Country, I imagine that will be one of the greatest series of HBO
that would be
history.
Great.
Like, I mean, I hope it is, because there's so much there that could be interesting. And if they don't make it cheesy, like in the way it could be, you know, if it's just as brutal as it needs to be, you know.
But I feel like we should frame this as not being like, oh, that was his first film, hope he gets better. It's more like, holy shit, that was amazing. I cannot wait to see what happens next.
I mean, this is the dude's directorial debut. I mean, sure, he shot a lot of TV or whatever, but the fact that you don't see too many, we see it more now, but like traditionally you don't see a lot of people going from TV up. You know, you see people dipping down, like Kevin Smith will do like Supergirl episodes or something like that, but or Rob Zombie, I think, did like Law and Order episodes or something like that. All those guys shoot weird stuff. Like Bobcat Goldthwait, I think he was the showrunner for like Conan for a long time. So there's a lot of people who come down to TV for a paycheck, but very rarely do you go the other way. And man, I think Jordan Peele's career is just going to be on fire. I mean, you just look at the two things, like they didn't make very much money off of Key and Peele, and there's some speculation this is why they stopped, is that Key and Peele was consumed mostly on YouTube. And so they don't have, unlike South Park, the South Park guys had this weird deal where they were like, we want all the internet rights for everything. And at the time, it was like this weird moment where they're like, internet rights? Who needs those? And so South Park owns southpark.com, all the revenue for South Park on YouTube, which is...
That's like how the woman who plays, is it Alice on The Honeymooners? Jackie Gleason's wife, that actress, her lawyer was like, oh, and also she gets money whenever this is shown again. And this is back when like shown again. What? It's a live TV show. Okay, whatever. And she ended up like being rich for the rest of her life from The Honeymooners. No one else saw a penny past. Wow. Unless Jackie Gleason was a producer. Anyway, I'm getting that story a little fudgy, but...
Yeah. But yeah, so like they didn't make much money off that. But this dude just made a fortune off of this movie. And like, so he has everything going for him right now. You know, he's telling the black story that Hollywood elites love. He made a boatload of fucking money, which the producers love. And he made a real deal, perfect pitch horror nerd movie. Yeah. Like, so I don't think he let any of those groups down at all. You know, I think, you would have to go out. You would have to really be dull to like hate on this movie, I think. Unless you had
there are only 2 bad reviews. Not like Rotten Tomatoes is really the litmus test for anything. But honestly, it was brought up in every article about this movie, like 100% on Rotten Tomatoes until National Review. And it's basically, this is just going to make them uppity article. It's pretty fucking sour. And then the other one is just a bad review. It's just like, it's not very good. And the review's not very well written, so... Yeah,
you can't traffic in that nonsense. There's a type of criticism that you could apply to this movie, I think, that is like in the way that you would accuse a movie like It Follows or Stranger Things of playing with a little bit of retromania. This movie does a little bit, you know? Sure. Like, there's the white Porsche, which is like the gray Porsche from Risky Business. Like, there's a lot of...
That basement rec room where he's bound up is fully like 70s rec room with the big slab television.
Yeah, totally. And then the way the suburb is shot in the very beginning of the film is just right out of Halloween. You know, just totally. the angles and the lighting. And so there's a type of argument where you're like, oh, this is unoriginal. But it's like sampling almost. Like Tarantino's movies are rad because they have all the rad shit that he loves. And being processed through his brain makes it this other thing. Yeah. Like, I mean, to me, like, can you imagine what a $30 million Jordan Peele movie is going to look like? It's going to be fucking great.
Yeah.
Or maybe it could go Kevin Smith style and it's terrible because he got everything he wanted, which I doubt. He seems to be more talented than that.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. I don't know.
There's just a couple of like last remaining things that are sort of... I don't know that a discussion can come of them, but one thing I noticed is that almost every car in this film is a Lincoln. I didn't see that mentioned in any writing or on any podcast or anything. Who Freed the Slaves? Let's not forget.
Oh, yeah.
When the garden party starts and there's this convoy of almost entirely black Lincolns pulling up to the party, I just thought that was really ironic. Also, there's this idea of the sunken place, which it seems is already sort of getting put into vernacular use. I actually have a friend who was talking about she and her other African-American friend had this experience and were like, oh my God, he just put me in the sunken place. And they were able to use that as a point of reference to sort of like have this reality check with each other. Like, we'll see where that goes. But that strikes me as being a very useful introduction into the English language to describe a very real situation.
Yeah. And then I was just thinking my immediate usage of it was like my wife and I watched this movie stoned, and I got super stoned near the end. I was like, I'm in the sunken place. And like, it was hilarious.
You're not.
Like,
no, Chad, no, it doesn't work that way, dude.
I guess it doesn't work like that. But it is interesting how he did choose to portray like that disassociative sort of thing.
His Chris's sunken place looks exactly like him staring at the television, waiting for his mother to get home, and his being paralyzed and not doing anything about it. But Jordan Peele pointed out that the sunken place is different for everyone. So all of these other characters, like Andre, for example, or the grandmother, whoever the grandmother originally was, whoever the grandfather originally was, that they're in the sunken place as well, but it's something else entirely. They're in another sunken place. It's not like watching a TV. It's something else.
It's very Hellraiser.
Oh, totally.
Of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's another dark reality for each of them.
Yeah. If you could body swap with any celebrity, whose body would you take on?
Like inhabit something
like if this ancient order was like, look, Mark, we know we have all this racial shit we do, and it's terrible, but we love your podcast so much that we would like you.
That Rose is going to go seduce someone for you?
Yeah, like you're going to have your choice of celebrity body. It doesn't have to be celebrity. I mean, you could pick some scrub, but
Jordan Peele.
You're going to take Jordan Peele.
First thing that came to mind.
Very meta of you. But yeah, but they're going to take your body and the body from the person, and you're going to have to inhabit that person. And keep in mind, you will be as famous as that person is currently, but possibly with less of their talents.
What's that guy who started that internet security company and then he fled to Central America?
McAfee?
Yeah.
You're going to take over.
He just does like cocaine all day
on
a beach.
I mean, you could do that with your body now. No, I'm saying you might not even get their money or anything like that. You simply get the gear.
I don't know. I'm pretty happy with the hand I got dealt. So,
but I mean,
that's hard to
10, 15 years from now, things start falling apart.
Yeah.
Think about like which young.
That guy from Superbad.
Jonah Hill?
I can't answer this seriously. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Okay. How about you?
Man.
I mean, obviously the guy who plays Khal Drogo, but...
Oh, yeah. Why wouldn't you want that? That guy has major appeal.
He has no problems ever.
No,
I'm sure
dude,
of it.
I mean, he definitely doesn't get to eat exactly what he'd want to.
He's just climbing Mount Awesome every day.
Yeah, that dude is a science experiment for sure. Like that, yeah. But I would definitely probably go for something like that. I think, so the most unfair would be if you were Idris Elba all of a sudden. Like, but I'm married, so I couldn't really use the Idris Elba powers as well as I would like. Let's see. Man, that fucking UFC fighter, Sage Northcutt, it looks like a weird science experiment. He's like a little freaky power pack guy. That body would be pretty good to take on. The Rock like 10 years ago would have probably been number one. Yeah.
Yeah, but he wasn't in the Fast and Furious movies yet. So.
10 years ago? Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, those movies have been around forever.
God, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
But they seem so fresh.
Yeah, they're great.
We're totally off the rails. Do we have anything about Get Out left?
I think that it is going to show like a new way, and I think that we're going to get really terrible attempts at this type of story.
Absolutely.
Like in short order. Like I think that people are waking up to
getting woke.
Well,
too.
I mean, I think,
I'm
yeah, totally. But I think people are like kind of coming around to that, like there are these things in like deeper Black culture that are worth exploring. I mean, look at Ta-Nehisi Coates' Black Panther. Like, I don't know if you've seen the trailer for it, but it is a really exotic looking movie because it uses all this African stuff. I mean, or at least to me, it's exotic looking because I don't know anything about that stuff. So it has this immediate coolness to it. Like there's a character, who knows what he is, but he's sitting on like what's like looks like a council. He's wearing a suit and he looks like he's obviously some sort of like important supervillain or superhero or something, but he has like the big plate in his lip and it's like super like a blue color. And it's just so arresting and interesting and weird. You're like, oh, this is a whole different culture worth of things to mine and explore. And so far, it looks like they're doing it right. Like they got Ta-Nehisi Coates writing Black Panther. Like dude went to Howard. Like he's definitely going to be able to like not make this lame.
Yeah.
And you wonder if it'll be almost like a neo-blaxploitation thing. You know, like who will do it first wrong? You know, who will be the bad version of it? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the hope is that this will open the door to more variety of experience, of lived experiences being funded by Hollywood and explored through that system. That, you know, we can complain about Hollywood all we want, but the fact is and by we, I'm talking about us all, like we watch those movies. We all watch those movies. We all, even the haters, watch an awful lot of the blockbuster films. And when those blockbuster films actually live up to some sort of standard, it's really magical, and can only hope that that continues.
Yeah. Something else I was thinking about, you know, like for a long time, there's been this whole conversation about where are the like blockbuster Tom Cruise level Black actors, you know, and people will say like, oh, Denzel Washington, or you'll name like the people who everyone can name, right? But there really isn't, or traditionally hasn't been a whole lot of that. And I was thinking like a lot of these big name, huge blockbuster actors that we all love came up through genre films.
Yes.
You know, so I think that as genre films adapt more diversity, it's going to naturally push like John Bodea is a perfect example.
Who's that?
He's the dude from, I'm probably mispronouncing his name. He is the stormtrooper in the new Force Awakens. But he is great in Attack the Block. Like he's one of the kids, you know, so it's like right there. There's one kid who was in a killer genre movie and he was super cool, and he's going to be...
Well, this is a conversation that Jordan Peele had about casting this film, is like, we need a star to move this film. And he was like, okay, there's Michael B. Jordan. Who else have we got? Like, okay, well, the fact that's a short list is a serious fucking problem with the way Hollywood functions.
Yeah, and the cool thing about it, too, is, like, as you have directors like Jordan Peele, and they're, you know, like, if you get the Jordan Peele, you're definitely going to get, like, the Kevin Smith level Black filmmaker. Yeah. You know, the dude who is, I mean, I can't say it's, Jordan Peele's first effort came after much more success, but right now there is a kid in the West Oakland or Chicago or somewhere with a camera who is seeing this movie and thinking like, holy shit, this is going to be, I'm going to make a fucking movie like this. And he's going to be like immersed in all the shit the way that Kevin Smith was. And, you know, that'll be a whole different category of film. And like, man, it's pretty cool to think about that. And like, you almost think like, oh, there should be a $40 million cap. Like this is like the socialism thing for like movies. Like, let's just make more weird movies for less money and see what happens. A lot of directors
talk about that is like when some bigger directors are, for some reason, when they take certain scripts or work with certain people, they're like, well, I only had this much money to do it, and that's why it was a better film, because there were fewer meddling hands, there were fewer bankers, there were, I had to economize and be creative and crafty again, and that's often what happens. You know, there is, however, part of me that is a bit cynical about this, because we have seen these moments happen time and time again with Hollywood. You know, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, like that was pretty revelatory and groundbreaking at the time. It's not like it introduced its own social thriller movement of the time. You know, it's not like post Frozen Disney realizes that like, oh, telling girls stories that aren't about getting saved by a prince are actually where it's at. It was just like, oh, this is revolutionary, but there's just this one time.
Yeah, well, I think that's exactly what I'm talking about, like, and fearful of like what's going to be lame is like, there's a difference between saying, let's make some black movies, and saying these black actors and directors are doing great work. Let's do more work with them. Like they're going to naturally make these black stories because you make kind of the story that you live a lot of times. And like, I think like recognizing this talent in unique places or places that, like that money hasn't particularly been thrown to in the past. I think like putting more money into those efforts is going to be way cooler than some, you know, right now I'm sure there's somebody who saw this movie and was like, got to make a Black Avengers, you know, like, and right. That movie would probably be done really poorly. Whereas you have like Black Panther, which is basically a Black Avengers tale, but it seems to be done with more of a focus on like letting the people involved just be more artistic, which is always cooler. Like, and it's that artist versus product thing, you know,
which again, the cynic in me believes that Hollywood as a system lets happen in short waves. Like we have these moments and they run their course and they stop getting funded. It's not that the creativity dries up. It's that the production studios just decide like, no, that's over. Yeah. I mean, like, you know, back to your Fast and Furious thing, like that came after the indie film boom, you know, like, right. So, you know, does Jordan Peele become Robert Rodriguez and make a bunch of fucking Spy Kids movies down the road? You know, who knows? But those are the, you know, to that's not a dig on Robert Rodriguez. He's always talked about how those were the most fun films to make because they're so innovative. Like they basically invent some new shit every time. So, but they're fucking Spy Kids movies. I mean, yeah, at some point you're going to make a talking dog film and it's going to be what puts all of your grandchildren through university. Yeah, totally. I mean, that's basically what Crispin Glover does. You know, Crispin Glover, you know what I'm talking about? Oh, yeah. Yeah. So he went and did the Charlie's Angels movies to fund a bunch of his other weird projects, you know? Well, that's the Soderbergh thing, right? One indie, one blockbuster, one indie, one blockbuster. Yeah. Like Ocean's 11 bubbles, you know? Yeah, and it's weird because I feel like in Soderbergh's case, I feel like those blockbusters are more successful movies. I mean, not just in the numbers. I just mean like... They're better movies. They're better movies. Yeah. Like I think if you showed any of those movies to just an uninitiated person without any sort of... Like if you could somehow say like, you don't know who this movie is, just watch it. What do you think? Most people, I think, are going to put the art house movies he made on one side of the graph. Yeah. And the other movies... Totally. Maybe. Hopefully. I've watched Ocean's 11 probably more times than all of his other indie films combined. So this is just a random observation, but for some reason this movie made me think of you know, the Public Enemy song Night of the Living Bassheads. It starts off with a sample by Khalid Abdul Muhammad, who's a very problematic figure in the history of the African American struggle, but the sample is, have you forgotten that once we were brought here, we were robbed of our name, robbed of our language. We lost our religion, our culture, our God, and many of us, by the way we act, even lost our minds. Sort of felt like in some skewed way, this film was a realization of that quote into a narrative film. Well, all that stuff is... There's a whole like African spiritualist movement that is connected to that guy. And, yeah, it always does talk about like there were these original African orders of like, you know, adepts and things like that. And they always say that the ancient Illuminati orders, like the white ones, have somehow like stolen that. So yeah, it makes sense to me. Yeah. Yeah. This is some highly laden material. I feel like this is a movie we could talk about forever because there is so much in it. And it seems that you and I both have epic notes for this episode, but I found that I would watch this movie, write a bunch of notes, then maybe like listen to a podcast interview with Jordan Peele, and he would cover like a third of those notes. And so I'd like scratch them out, and then I'd, listen to the commentary of the film, and then that would scratch out half of them. And he is exactly kind of what this podcast is about for me. Like he embodies that sort of like nerd thriller, socially conscious, philosophical way of thinking about the world and media and art.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought the same thing. I had like 14 pages of notes written for this, and and I was looking at it originally. I was like, yeah, all this shit, like all the stuff, like he picked the cotton out of the chair and stuffed it in his ears, and I was like, all this stuff. And I was like, back to kind of my not even criticism, but like what I was saying earlier is it's all right there.
Yeah.
And then he was right there to affirm all those theories pretty much immediately. So you have to wonder if he had maybe just shut the fuck up like Kubrick, if this movie would have been more talked about. Like if, like when you're like irritatingly obfuscating things like Nicholas Renfin or whatever the fuck his name is, the dude that did the Neon Demon, whose name I've forgotten. He is so coy about it. Yeah. That it's sort of like, the Neon Demon is our episode that is consistently just rising in numbers. And all you have to do is like, Neon Demon, what the fuck happened? Like there's so much like questioning.
And we're the number one result on Google.
Yeah, I wish. I think we're in the first couple pages though, which is pretty crazy.
Nice.
But like, it's almost... like I like this type of interaction with the director where like I was totally right, but at the same time, it's not as fun long term. Like, I just read this kind of little thriller called Kubrick's Game, and it's super fun because it's basically what's the stupid movies with Tom Hanks?
Forrest Gump?
No, not no, the ones where he's like running around with clues.
From those books.
The Dante games or fuck.
The Da Vinci Code.
The Da Vinci Code. Yeah, the Dante games.
That sounds way more interesting.
Yeah. Man, I wonder what the Dante games would be about. It's just like about a bunch of plucky millennials trying to fight their way to the center of hell to win a prize. That means that they don't actually have to work anymore. Like that's what the prize is. Early retirement. But yeah, like Kubrick's Game was basically a Da Vinci Code, but for film nerds, and part of what enables a book like that to be even written is that Kubrick loaded the shit up, but never talked about it. Like, in Eyes Wide Shut, there is the Masonic eagle with a crown all over the place. Like the entire film is just crammed with occult visuals.
Right. Well, I would say there cannot be a Room 237 of Get Out.
Exactly.
Room 237 exists because he never said shit. So you can totally go like, yeah, well, he faked the moon landing and here's proof. Mm-hmm. It's in The Shining. And it's a pretty convincing argument. And you don't have the director ever contradicting that.
Right.
But with Get Out, like he explained it all. So you can't go like, actually, this film is about the plight of the Native American people,
Yeah. It's like when you're trying to think about like, how are you going to write your like Derridian hermeneutic look at Get Out? You kind of have to take his word for it because because he's the creator of the thing. And I think the whole auteur theory is of filmmaking where the director's intention is what's most important. Like that's something I've really come around to and pretty much just think of as just fact now.
But he's doing this in a moment like, for example, tonight it's a new episode of Game of Thrones, and I'm going to watch Game of Thrones, and then I'm going to watch my favorite breakdown videos on YouTube, because that's such an essential part of current media, is watching people dissect it before your very eyes. And Jordan Peele has very, very actively seized that. I'm not saying analytics are something new, but the way in which they're very present right now. Criticism is a big part of media right now. Not trolling criticism, but millennials speaking very quickly at a camera and then posting it on YouTube. That's sort of what Jordan Peele is in a certain way participating in.
Yeah. And I think that if you want to make a movie like a permanent art object, and this is something that kind of Bret Easton Ellis goes on a little bit about lately, which is that, you know, with films being so much like television, television being so much like films, the special, unique art form that was film is sort of disappearing a little bit. And like, as great as Get Out is, I don't think, and I could be totally wrong about this, but I don't think it's a movie that will be referenced by directors 40 years from now. You know, maybe for but even then you say, oh, for the bravery of wit, saying it's not any more brave than any other Oscar contender type race-based movie would be, you know? So I don't think that will carry on through the decades. And then it's, you know, it might just be like he told a little bit too much of the magic, you know, like for instance, you could watch a David Blaine special a couple times if you watched it sober once and then high another time. A Penn and Teller skit is really only funny one way through, because like once you've seen the magic, the trick has no more magic for you. You don't believe anymore, and like the belief sort of makes the thing more fun. And it's like when you're a little kid and you go out on Halloween, it's more fun to think there's ghouls and monsters out there, and then when you realize that that's not a thing, you know. And then if you have all these wild, like I think Stanley Kubrick movies are always going to be fun to watch because there's just endless amounts of interpretation. I mean, there's a whole movie, Room 237, which you were talking about, which is about crazy fucking people talking about this movie in crazy ways. And I don't think you'll get that from Get Out.
I think implicit somewhere in what you're saying is a very optimistic view of the way American history is going to proceed in terms of race.
Yeah, I think it's going to get mellowed out. Personally, like I just think about, I mean, just reading, I know Lovecraft Country is a fiction, but just read about that there were guides, like Negro travel guides of like where a gas station you should not stop at no matter what is. Yeah. That's not that long ago. There's people alive right now that lived during that time. And as crazy and as
those
bad
guys are hella collectible, by the way.
They're like,
no, they are. They're...
Yeah. I mean, there's like a whole Southern Gothic thing that's like things are of that time are very valuable. It's interesting. Like, I wonder who the biggest collectors are. You know, if it's like weird old racist white people,
right? Or
like
the type of people who buy Nazi paraphernalia, or
or if there was a character in one of William Gibson's novels that was a black billionaire, and he collected artifacts of the Southern Gothic South as like almost like an ironic collection. He had like weird little racist dolls, and I wish I could remember. It's not.
Do you want to look it up?
No, it's not that important. Nobody reads William Gibson anymore.
Whoa,
it's true. We have the internet. It's fucking all past. Like,
yeah, it happened. Yeah, we're moving on.
Yeah, like everybody works for giant, terrible companies. Bill. Yeah. The only thing different is you don't plug your face into your computer. I mean, other than that, pretty good run.
Holy shit, we're not even close to Get Out anymore. Shall we fade to black and roll the credits?
Yeah. Go see this movie if you haven't. You know, don't be afraid to talk about this movie. I think is something that's fair
to say. I was very hesitant to even do this episode.
Yeah, and it's
honestly,
and because you get this like, oh, it's so fucking two white guys. What should we say about this movie? It's like, no, it's a fun movie, man. Like, you're allowed to go watch a fun movie and say what it made you think about. And hopefully somebody, if you're really wrong and you sound really retarded, then nowadays somebody's going to let you know, and that's fine, because especially the whole point of doing a show like this, or even like putting yourself out here, is that you want to learn. Like, this is continued adult learning in a very weird niche way.
Totally.
And it's, like I probably would have never read that Ta-Nehisi Coates book if I hadn't seen this film, the one that came out that everybody was raving about. And then like, I wouldn't have interacted with it in the same way either. Like, I know he's like he used to play D&D. So like his book is like, if you're the wrong kind of white person, you could get really offended by it. Right. Like it's a pretty harsh book. And it was Get Out that kind of made me more interested in reading that stuff. So I think, don't be afraid to talk about it. Like, watch it, have fun with it, think about it. Everybody loves Rod. Everybody hates Marnie. I mean, that's like two places that you can just start on.
Actually, I know we're winding down, but I did think it was interesting that such a common thing in horror films is you kind of root for the villain. You're kind of rooting for the villain.
Mm-hmm.
Not in this movie. Like you're just like, fuck those people, fuck those people.
Well, that's what we
Go
were talking.
Rod.
We talked about it on the last episode. We're like, oh, rooting for you, sort of like root for villains more than you root for protagonists. And this is definitely a movie where you want him to get out, and you're so stoked when Rod comes up to save the day. Because these are like, fuck these villains. Like you wouldn't want to be like these villains.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to the end of this movie, Spawning Conversation, we welcome your comments. Reach out politely.
Yeah, I don't.
In the spirit of dialogue.
And if you don't want to reach out politely, I will light your ass on fire. I'm just kidding. I'm done arguing on the internet. We'll probably just block you.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So subscribe on iTunes and Stitcher. Join our mailing list, and we're going to see you next time for Nightbreed.
Yeah, get ready. And so spoilers for that are going to be any of the comics, the movie, any version of it you can find, and the book. So,
but we're going to the Book of Cabal. But we're only going to you only need to see the movie.
Get ready.
Be ready.
Thanks.